I don't quite remember my first engagement with or interest in death, but I know that by the time I was 8, I was surprised I was still alive. I put that down to the fact that I was, according to the stories, a sickly child surrounded by concerned adults, making me feel like there's something going on here that I don't understand, but which they sensibly denied. Whatever the truth, it left me thinking that life was not something to get too engaged with, as I would be leaving it soon. Family death did hit soon enough, just not mine. In my mid-20s, both my grandmothers passed way too young, and then also too young. My father died in a car accident caused by a drunk driver when I was 30. Death was now real, but strangely still not scary. By then, I had been working with several Christian-focused theatre and dance companies in and around London, and had variously played, once in a single Lent Easter season, the roles of Jesus, St. Peter, Everyman, and yes, Death. You might say I was getting a little too close to the source material. When one has done the work of embodying these characters, or at least a particular manifestation of them, viewed through a medieval script and a modern director's eyes, one reads their stories rather more personally. Our first reading today from the Jewish scriptures says quite clearly in its first line, beautifully rendered, thank you, God did not make death and does not delight in the death of the living. To which I suspect one could hear many mutter, you could have fooled me. In the medieval Christian playwriters to whom we still have access, death is often presented as one of God's servants, sent as a warning to individuals and communities to prepare for judgment, a judgment which, the texts assure us, God very clearly hopes we will pass. St. Francis grew up in this medieval worldview, able to refer to her as Sister Death in his famous canticle. Praise be to you, my Lord, through our sister bodily death, from whom no living can escape. And it's not just religious play scripts which take this view. Medieval and later Renaissance artworks frequently include memento mori, or remembrances of death in them. A portrait of a famous living person in all their worldly finery would often have a skull on the desk or a skeleton in the corner as a little reminder that earthly glory is a passing thing. And in the real world, where death was, and in too many places still is, all around the living, one didn't have to look far for continual reminders of the lesson, a reminder that life is a test, and like an end-of-year exam, if we prepare for it, we will pass, but if we just mess around and waste time, we'll get an F. Today, we are caught in the crosshairs of these different Jewish and Christian images, along with our own contemporary one, more informed by science and facts. The contemporary view of death looks at both cellular biology and the ever-evolving cosmos, where, in both cases, nothing is ever still or stationary, and where everything which is made comes from something else and returns as something else. A cosmic and a cellular circle of life. This means that what we traditionally have called death is, at both the micro and the macro level, not an endpoint, but a place of transition. As one hospice worker friend of mine likes to say, there is such a thing as dying, but I don't believe there is such a thing as death. I think my 8-year-old self knew this, as maybe all children do, and that the words from the Book of Wisdom are still correct, even in the light of modern science. Death is not part of the Creator's plan or intention. Death is reserved for that which is not destined for immortality. Death is the state of being not God. Some weeks ago, Sam spoke in his homily about awe. I'm trying to get the pronunciation correct, because I would have said awe, but awe. And subsequently sent out a link to a brilliant new PBS documentary about Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the French Jesuit paleontologist and theologian. In it, they discussed, amongst other things, Teilhard's growth into the belief that there is no separation between spirit and matter, that God is one and so is all creation, even the rocks and the stones. This is clearly an awesome idea. Our readings today, however, are not just about death. They're also about healing. Too often seen as opposites, these two are, I would like to suggest, very related. In hospice work, they talk a lot about being a healing service. They're not a curative one. We can't cure the patient, but we might be able to help them heal, and their family too. As my favorite AI support platform, perplexity.ai, I can highly recommend it, informs me, curing refers to the elimination of disease or the correction of a medical condition, restoring the patient to a normal psychological state, focusing on the physical aspects of health. Healing, on the other hand, is a broader and more holistic process that involves the restoration of wholeness and well-being, encompassing emotional, social, and spiritual dimensions. Healing can occur even in the absence of a cure. This process is more about the patient's journey and personal growth, facilitated by the healthcare provider's support and empathy. I tend to agree. The Greek language has, I'm told, several words for both processes, and the one that Mark used to describe the spoken request of Jairus, the unspoken request of the woman, and the felt action of Jesus is about healing rather than curing. Today's English translation says, both the woman and Jairus, for his daughter, asked to be made well. Another translation I found says, made whole. In either case, the action of Jesus is a response to this hope and faith. The result is that both the unnamed woman and the unnamed daughter were not only cured, but also healed, restored to wholeness and their rightful place in the community, able, we hope, to reclaim their names. And it's interesting that Mark says the woman had been suffering for 12 years and the girl was 12 years old. Restoration and a sense of wholeness is something, I guess, we all seek. I don't know about yours, but my experience of both therapy and spiritual direction is that to truly desire, to hope for what is for my wholeness and healing, I must let go of, to let die, my attachments to old ways and thoughts and fears. Sometimes it was about social connections or conventions and what others might think of me. Sometimes it was all about finding the courage to be a creator of my own life. Often it's about recognizing my addictions to the little traditions and conventions of my life, which were never for my wholeness, just for others' control or social convention, or my fears of one thing or another. I've learned these little deaths must be engaged, endured, and let go of so that I can move forward and feel whole and healed. It can take courage, sometimes great courage, just as it did for the woman in the story, to come forward and confess her condition, her fears, and her actions. And just as it did for Jairus to come forward and ask for help. But equally excitingly, for the writer of Mark's Gospel, the medium is also the message. The act of telling the story is itself countercultural. For the central characters are outside the traditional religious parameters of salvation. They're both sick women, one older, one younger, and consequently without standing in the community, Jewish or Roman. They had conditions which defined them as unclean and worthless to an observant Jew or a regular Roman. One old and bleeding, and the other a female child and dead. And Mark chooses to break all those rules by actually choosing to tell the story, giving us a Jesus who is free of the rules. He proclaims the good news, which is for everyone, and especially for the least. Mark proclaims a Jesus who, by his actions, confirms the words of Lady Wisdom from our first reading. Death is not a work of God, nor a state for those who are of God. The old cultural set of values are declared dead, to be not of God. And the new community of Jesus is confirmed to be about life, to be of God. In the process of these healings, what died that day? Who or what was in a state of being not God and needed to be let go? The prejudice of the crowd, the fear of the woman, the need for control and convention by the disciples, the pride of Jairus. It reminds us that when healing happens and hope and faith are affirmed and fulfilled, something has to be let go, to be allowed to die. When we seek God, the not God no longer has a place. One of my favorite saints, Stephen Sondheim, once wrote a song for his show A Little Night Music entitled Every Day a Little Death. Can we learn to welcome the little deaths each day so that we can always be healed more every day? It takes courage, but I suspect it's worth it. As Sondheim also wrote, dreams come true, not free. And so my hope, my prayer for all of us is that we may dream deeply, hope madly, and have faith fully for our and others' healings in a world where clearly so much is ailing. And may we also always be ready to have the courage to pay the price, which is the letting go of whatever is not God in our lives. After all, to repeat some of the first reading, God did not make death and does not but delight in the death of the living. For God created all things so that they might exist. The generative forces of the world are wholesome, and there is no destructive poison in them. For righteousness is immortal. God created us for incorruption and made us all in the image of God's own immortality. The work is worth it because you're going to live forever anyway, so get used to it.